All right, so I believe I have started the stream. Would someone mind checking that for me on YouTube?
Can you
Thank
plug
you.
me in while you're down here? Thank you, appreciate it, lady.
Anybody else while I'm here?
All right, so as promised, thank you. So as promised yesterday, I talked about doing an exercise where we would kind of just brainstorm names of languages or frameworks or whatever you can think of. And what we're going to do is we're just going to write them all down a list, and then we're going to talk about where they fit, what they are, whether they're a language, a framework, kind of where it fits in, and what the notion of a stack is. So I shared this in the Google Classroom. It should say week 7, day 2, and this long thing. You're welcome to follow along on the screen, or it's awesome everyone's joining in. So let's get started. Name something that you've heard in programming.
Name something?
Like
A language, a frame. PHP, great. Keep it going. React. SQL.
API. CSS.
Yep. Nope. Great.
Xcode.
Yep. That's SQL. I spelled that one wrong.
C++.
Yep.
Node and like Homebrew and all of that kind of stuff that we
Machine
use to
language.
download things.
x86. That's an assembly program.
X. What was it?
x86.
Like that?
I don't know if it's a language or
No,
it's
like
an
x86, like the
it's
86.
Oh, x86. Okay.
Oh, yeah,
SAS.
Pascal.
Oh my God, Pascal was the language I took in college, which was
HTML. That's my cousin's name, Pascal.
Debugging.
We got HTML.
C#. Oh, Python.
Code verification. Accessible code.
Let's focus more on like names instead of concepts.
Names.
Ruby
Okay.
and we have React.
We have React.
JSON.
React Native.
Sure. JSON. Sure.
Ruby on Rails.
Would Xamarin count?
Xamarin counts. Web application I'm going to hold off just because it's like think more proper names, like things that would be capitalized.
Okay.
What's the other one? Microsoft can be used to build databases.
JavaScript.
Yeah, so we'll put in Microsoft SQL Server because that's the specific Microsoft product.
What's the other one? Is it JavaScript native or
TypeScript?
No, there's another one that goes with React Native.
It was the one Zoe used, right?
I think so.
Oh, they're using. I just read her blog post on that.
Yeah, it's another native. It's like because I think it correlates with JavaScript. Oh my gosh.
Native script.
Yes, thank you.
Would Alexa skills count?
Sure, we can put them in there.
As a language.
How about Linux?
Linux, sure.
Blockchain.
Did anyone say Unix? Is Linux Unix? Are they the same?
Linux, they're similar. I'm just going to do a slash.
Okay.
They're in the same category.
iOS and Android.
And I'm going to put parentheses around these, and I'll explain it later.
Okay.
Can
we name things like Visual Studio IDEO?
Sure, we can do Visual Studio and VS Code.
Of course, now
It's
I should
stuff
like
we
write it
used
down
to-
while people are talking.
Like when the Apple computers first came out, basic and too basic. There we go.
Google language, there's a Google program language, I don't know which one it is.
Go is Google's.
Yeah.
Fortran.
That's what it is.
Oh, Fortran.
Fortran's like the first.
Drupal or
Drupal, sure. Throw WordPress in there.
Moodle?
Dart,
Dart,
Bash.
Bash.
terminal. Wait, that's not really.
Terminal's more of a tool. We'll put it in here.
Anything else you can think
Database.
Sure. Put Mongo in there while we're at it.
And this is not a, this is a term, web scraping? I don't know what that is. Or data scraping.
of? Oh, you said programming languages, right?
Yeah,
So,
let's.
So can we say like they used to use the punch cards back in the day. So I don't know what the proper term for that is.
I don't know what.
But that's what they used to program.
Yeah.
My dad used to bring those home from National.
That's how I did it, that's how we had to do it in college. I don't remember how we did it, but.
I'm gonna veto that one.
I
We're
think-
we're
No,
gonna
you
focus
can't do that.
on more modern typed languages.
I think that should get us started.
Yeah, start with punch
What are they always
cards and work
talking
your
about?
way.
Open hack, open hack, they're always.
Go ahead.
I'm thinking about like data, like the connection between data and the back end and then the front end. Is that called something? Like
APIs.
API.
I think we have APIs on the list.
They have new, I forgot what it was called again, but you can, they have their own web page where you can get information and create a.
Up on the latest.
Single page application or API based React.
It's like IBM, but it's a company, but they have a place where they collect data, business information. I don't know. I don't think it has anything.
Okay. If you think of it, or if anyone else thinks of anything while we're going, feel free to throw it out. So the point of this exercise is it is super important to go out into the community, right? And the way that you move from entry level to junior to senior level is obviously experience, but the best way to get that experience is from other people. And so when you're out there and talking, you'll hear these terms, and you'll hear someone go, like I did yesterday, oh, I'm a full stack JavaScript developer. And you went, what's full stack JavaScript, right? And it's like, that's a perfectly valid question. And people kind of, I don't want to say they brag about their stack, but it's kind of the, hey, I spend all day writing code in these languages or these tools, and this is what I use. And so when senior developers meet other developers, it's kind of like dogs sniffing each other's butts, right? It's like, what do you program in? Oh, you're one of those. And so a stack at the end of the day is front end, right? Things that the end user is going to see. And front end kind of gets broken up into two categories. Front end can either be HTML and CSS and the visual side of it, or it can be the interactivity side of it. Okay, what happens when I click on that button? Then you have your back end, which is also sometimes called servers. Your back-end language are things that you're going to write out on your server that run based off of something that happens on the front end. And then you have databases, and databases is where you save information. And then you also have mobile, right? And iOS, Android, BlackBerry, if you want to throw it way back, right? Those all have different categories. Now, we're going to go through each one of these and put a label on what it is. Some of these are interesting, though. Like JavaScript can be used both on the front end and the back end, right? So we're going to identify JavaScript as a programming language, but it's like we're going to apply tags to each one of these, right? So we're going to say, all right, yes, it's a language, but where is that language used? Okay, it's used in the front end and the back end. So let's get started. Anyone know where PHP is used? Back end. So we're going to say it is a language, and we're going to say it's backend. React. And what's it written in? And is it a language or is it a framework? Awesome.
So what does that mean?
So, yeah.
Sure, great question. So a framework are tools, they provide you tools to build out whatever you want. So basically, React goes, it's kind of like the JavaScript methods, right? Here are all these things that you can do with push and pop and shift and unshift and all of those. A framework is going to say, hey, these tools weren't built into JavaScript to get started. But so many people like them that we kind of built them into a nice, neat package and then told you that you could use them.
Okay, so it's like Bootstrap or
Bootstrap.
Tailwind?
We're going to put Bootstrap on the list. All right. SQL. Backend, but be a little bit more specific.
Is it database?
Database. And I'm just going to do in here some common SQL instances are MySQL, MS SQL, Microsoft SQL, Oracle SQL Server, and Postgre SQL.
Would NoSQL be on there?
No, but I'll put that on the list when I get down there. Okay, so it's a database. Databases most of the time are run in the backend, but it's not specifically. Well, I guess we can put backend on it. That's okay. And all right, I'm gonna cheat here. I'm gonna add another row. So SQL itself is actually a language. It is a syntactically. It has keywords, it has commas, it has parentheses, it has semicolons. So SQL itself is a language. All of these are database and backend, but it's the product. So you can write SQL in MySQL, you can write SQL in Microsoft SQL or Oracle or Postgre. It's more the variant of the tool that you pick. So I'm just gonna tag that as like it's a product variant. So I'll put it as.
And that's not the same as a framework?
It's similar in structure to a framework. The weird thing with SQL is the language, and then pretty much any SQL statement that you write in MySQL, you can then go take that statement and copy and paste it right into Microsoft SQL, and it will run fine and return the same data. It all stemmed from licensing, and Oracle was like the big name in databases, and then Microsoft had their own product. And now it's gotten down to the nitty gritty of like, Oracle SQL might be a little bit faster at executing these kinds of queries, but Microsoft is better at storing bigger amounts of data, but MySQL is free. And it's open source, so there are benefits to MySQL as well. Yeah, that's a tough one to explain because SQL's kind of on its own little world. But it would be like you can use JavaScript and React, or you can use JavaScript and Node, right? It's kind of the SQL is the language, and then MySQL and Oracle and all of those are places that you can write your SQL.
What does it mean? What do you mean by database? Like it manages the database, it updates the data, what's it doing to the
It
database?
is the database itself.
Okay.
So when you you guys get me for the node section as well, and we will briefly touch on databases and how to save data and all of that stuff. We will probably be using MySQL. We might also touch on Mongo. I haven't quite done the curriculum yet. Um, it is when you set it up on your computer, in addition to starting your Node server, which you guys are used to doing, you'll also start a MySQL server. And then Node will go talk to MySQL, and MySQL is where you store all of your data.
Okay. What, is there a program that like does the the analytics that interprets the data that you can use to see,
There are things like D3, which we can put on the list, which is a visualization library.
Okay.
There are also some languages that are better than others, and then at doing data analytics, and there are also frameworks that help you do those analytics. Okay, so API.
I know back-end, I was going to say back-end.
I'm going to actually say this is more of a concept. You can build APIs. APIs stand for Application Programming Interface. It is a back-end concept, so I will put it there. You would use an API in your front end to talk to your back end. Okay, Ruby. Mm-hmm. And where is it used? Mm-hmm. Python?
Language.
And I'm also going to, yeah, we'll leave it at that. That's fine. Redux. It is a concept for managing front end data in state. So Redux is similar to, you could say it's a framework, except Redux doesn't actually give you, before I open my mouth, give me 1 second. I personally am not a fan of Redux, even though I am a React developer. Okay, we're gonna say it is a framework as well. So Redux does give you methods for managing this state. Now I'm gonna put an asterisk on all of this. Some frameworks are actually libraries. There are subtle nuances between what's the difference between a framework and a library. So you could go through this exercise with another instructor and they might say, well, yeah, Python is a language, but it's not always used in the back end, right? And that's true. So this isn't the definitive guide. I wouldn't like look up things in here and be like, well, Max said that Python is yes.
So help me to understand why you would consider Redux a framework and API not a framework.
Sure. So there are no specific tools for an API. There's no, hey, API.get.
Okay.
There's no.
So Redux has a specificity about it.
Yes.
Okay.
And so what I did is I actually went to npm.js, which is a repository of all of these JavaScript packages.
Okay.
And frameworks and all kinds of other fun things in JavaScript, and Redux came right up. And so there's documentation on Redux, there's a real world usage, and they don't have any code samples in here, but normally oh yeah, they do. There are some code samples in here. So API is more of a overarching idea. You use APIs, but you don't use the API, if that makes sense.
Right.
So looking at the definition, a set of functions and procedures. I guess you can look at it that way too, as a procedure. This is
The
just a
API set of functions and procedures, right? So you might use Redux to build an API.
You wouldn't use it to build the API, but you would use it instead of using it to build the API on the back end, because APIs are built on the back end. You would actually use Redux to store the information that came from the API on the front end.
Okay, but the API, I guess what I was driving at was that anything that is considered a language might be used to build an API, like
A back-end language,
a back-end
yes.
language
Yes.
is used. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what
So I'm backing off on this. I am
Okay.
going to take it off as a concept.
Okay.
And we're just going to put that there and this here. Okay. Jquery.
Back-end?
Mm-mm.
No.
Jquery is used on the front end. It is used to manipulate the DOM, which is pages and things in your HTML. It is written in JavaScript, and it is a framework. So jQuery basically evolved out of a bunch of developers going, hey, you know, JavaScript kind of sucks. Like, we're trying to do these things, and every time we go to do something in JavaScript, we have to write out this 20-line function. And we do it over and over and over again. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just start a project and drop one line of code in and then always have access to that function? And then it grew and grew and grew and grew, and jQuery is now used on a ton of different websites. And only in the past year, 2, 3 years, has it been in a decline because people are now starting to use newer frameworks like React or Angular instead of using jQuery. CSS, front end, and
language.
Yep. Okay, Xcode.
It's a tool.
It is a tool. That's very good. Does anyone, you know what IDE stands for?
Integrated Development Environment.
You got it. So it is like Visual Studio Code on steroids. So I don't use Visual Studio Code. I know a lot of professional senior developers who have been coding for years who use it. It comes down to personal preference. I use a tool called WebStorm, and it has some fancy tools built into it that make it much easier for me to write code. Some people go and use WebStorm and love all the help that it provides them. I know some developers to this day that are writing code in their terminal because that's where they find they can write code the fastest. So it really comes down to personal preference. But it is a tool, and I'm going to put IDE over here, and then code editor in parentheses, because at the end of the day, that's what most IDEs are. C++.
Backend. No, database. No, I'm lying.
It's a language.
It's a
I don't
language.
know what you want first, though.
It is used in the back end. And I'm also going to say it's also used in desktop class applications. So actual, like Microsoft Word, for example, might be built in C++. Knowing Microsoft, it's probably built in C#. Gag me. Okay, front end.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Going back to Redux, when you say managing front-end data in state, what does in state mean?
Sure, great question. Sure, yeah. So you can think of state as it's kind of like temporary data, right? So, okay, the database has the ultimate source of truth. And when you get that data, from the front end, you can't connect right to a database. You need a back end in the middle. The reason you need a back end in the middle is their security, right? You don't want to let every user have access to every piece of data in the database. So you put a back end in the middle. And that back end can be written in JavaScript with Node, or Python with Django, or Flask, or Ruby with Rails, or PHP. Once you get that data, right, and it comes through your API from the database, it then is in your website. And that is when you store the data in state. So it's kind of like okay, this data's here. It might be out of date with the back end, but it's kind of just here on this page. And as soon as I close the page, that data is gone because it's out of the state. So state's kind of like your temporary placeholder, so to speak, of where you can hold your data. Okay, front end.
What the end user
Interacts.
with, yeah.
So let's call that a concept.
Sure.
All right, guys, everyone.
Take it off the list.
Back end.
Same.
Another concept.
Now, if at any point you guys are like, okay, what do you mean concept? Like, I don't know what that concept is, feel free to stop me and ask. Node.
Is it a framework? I don't even know.
I think it's a tool.
I think it's a framework, right?
Can we just put like how many columns can we go across here? Okay, it is used in the back end. It uses JavaScript. It is a framework. No, that's not what I want.
Oh, that's not
It is a runtime environment. Uses JavaScript. We're going to call it a framework because there are certain functions that are built into Node. It's close enough to a framework. We're calling it a framework.
What is runtime environment? What does that mean?
Sure. So runtime environment, we're putting it on the list.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
And
did you put
Mongo.
Angular
Because
on
I've
there?
seen that.
We didn't get Angular?
No.
I don't think
No.
so, you just said it, and I was like, I don't think anybody mentioned it.
And I put Mongo on there. I wasn't going to let that one slide.
Oh, okay.
So runtime environment is a concept, and if you break down the words, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a place where it is an environment that your code can run at the time that you want it to run. So it is basically something where you can just hit the run this code button. Anything where you can say run this code, that would be a runtime environment.
So is that like when you do your JavaScript and then you run it in Node or index? Okay.
Yep. So most programming languages have a runtime environment built into them. So you write your Python and then you go into the terminal and you say Python script.py, right? And that is just like node index.js, right? You're running that. So that programming language, when you install it on your computer, has a runtime environment built into it. Okay. Homebrew.
Which is not something we had to download, so we could download
Package
or
Tool. It is a package manager. That's good. We will put that on there. Package managers are we're also going to call that or a repo, a repository of packages, right? So Homebrew is kind of interesting. It is not only well, I guess that's true for most repositories. It is a list of all these things that you can install on your computer, and it knows where to install it. And it is also a tool that helps all those lists of packages install. And I'm going to put terminal in here because Homebrew is typically used in the terminal as well. Machine language. I would put that down as a concept. Machine language is what your code essentially gets compiled down to. So it is technically readable, but what comes out of that is going to be thousands of lines longer than the couple hundreds worth of lines that you put into it. x86.
That was like Texas Instruments.
You have an x86 sitting right in front of you. No, that your computer.
Oh.
Everyone does.
Yeah.
So x86 is a concept. It is actually a CPU architecture. It's also sometimes called 64-bit. It is the design of the actual motherboard CPU chip. So it is the way the software runs inside your processor at the binary level. Yes.
So, as we're talking about these different languages, I just did a quick search to see if there was anything special being used for artificial intelligence or
Yep.
augmented reality.
Yep.
And there are two new ones that I've never heard of before. One is called Bliss, and the
Okay.
other one is called Prologue. I was wondering if we can add those to the list
Sure.
and maybe talk about them at the end.
Bliss.
Lisp, Lisp.
Oh, Lisp. Okay. Yep.
And the other one is Prolog, Prolog.
Okay.
Uh,
Got it. Okay. Unicode.
I
Sure.
have a question. So, what is the actual machine language that you encode in? I thought that was called x86 as well.
That's a little bit out of my scope, a little bit out of my knowledge. Well, one way to find out, right?
mhm.
CPU architecture, generally used to refer to any 32-bit processor. Uh,
I took a class and we learned machine level code, and it was something 86. So
Yeah, it was x86 and A7, it was
Assembly language.
assembly language.
x86 assembly language. Okay, so let's put that on the list if I can find it. What did I do with it? Here we go. So x86, I actually labeled this wrong. That should say 32-bit. And then we'll do assembly language. And it's just assembly. And that is a language. And the closest thing I can say to that is it is desktop grade. Right, so it would be used locally to write programs that ran on your computer.
A low-level language.
Low-level language, yes. We'll put that in there. And what Dave means by low level is there aren't any niceties. So in JavaScript, you say var my var equals 5, right? And you run the program and you're done. And you go, all right, yeah, I console logged it or I did whatever I want with it, and okay, that's fine. And I can go use my computer, and I'm not worried that 5 is hanging out somewhere in memory. In low-level languages, the computer's like, you told me 5. I'm not forgetting 5 until you tell me to forget 5. And it's also going to go, okay, well, that's great. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it my var. Where do you want to put my var? What do you, I want to know what place on the memory I can stick my var. And if you got to tell me that exact spot, and if you tell me you want to put something else there, I'm going to blow up. I'm going to I'm going to forget everything, but I'm not going to delete it. I'm just going to make it so you can't access it anymore.
So hostile.
So there.
So that is low-level languages, and that's why we are very grateful for Node and very grateful for some of these more modern programming languages that do all of that for us, because the computer still needs all of that, but that's all abstracted away, right? That's all hidden away and managed for us. Okay, Unicode.
Conversion.
I'm going to say it's a standard. We will call it it is as close to a concept as possible. It is a agreed upon an agreed upon way of storing characters in the computer.
Yep.
Right. So when you hit A, the computer doesn't actually save A in the computer. It actually saves /u and a couple numbers that go with it, because it all has to get down to bits at the end of the day. And so Unicode is the agreed upon method of, okay, when I store these bits, it's going to come out to this character code, which is equal to this character that we know.
So along with
Yep, very good.
Okay.
And ASCII is CCI. That looks right. ASCII was created long before Unicode, before people thought that non-English speakers would be using computers, right? And so they literally ran out of space, and they're like, "Whoa, how do we store A with a tilde over it? We don't know how to do that." Um, and so Unicode was born, and now, fun fact, the reason why people know Unicode now is because Unicode, the body that controls it, also makes emojis. So the Unicode standard, we're now on Unicode 9, and 8 is what's built into iOS, and when you hear about new emojis coming out, it's the Unicode standard being updated. SAS.
It's a framework.
A tool.
I'll let framework. Yeah, I think it's a framework because there are, it's also, I'm gonna say it's more of a language than it is a framework, right? Because there are, when you write SAS, you're not writing CSS, you're writing a varied version of CSS. So you can't take SAS and just dump it right into a CSS file and expect it to run, right? There are certain things like nesting properties in SAS that you can't do in CSS. So I would say it's more of a language than a framework. But the easy way to find out on these is to go on their extension language.
It's a compiler, though, kind of too, right?
Yep, we will put compiler on the list. That would fall under tool, but yes, it is a compiler. Pascal.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I was told that like things like Node and jQuery,
Mhm.
things like Angular, like they're kind of what you described SAS to be, which is like if you know JavaScript, you'll have to do a little more learning because it's not exactly like JavaScript.
Yep.
Is that true, or is it just?
It is. So as that's why I'm going through some of these, and like for things like jQuery, I specifically put JavaScript in it because frameworks tend to be written in specific languages, or the framework is written in that language, and then you go and use that framework in whatever language the framework was written in.
So should we say SAS is a framework and then CSS?
Yeah, we can do that.
So if I wanted to do something in JavaScript, would it be the same? If like without using the functions that come with the framework, would it be the same as in like a jQuery or something like that?
So jQuery is written in straight up JavaScript. React uses something called JSX, which is like a hybrid between JavaScript and HTML. But React itself is written in JavaScript. So if you looked at React code, you would go, "Oh, that's JavaScript. Like that looks like JavaScript. You know, you have const and lets and parentheses and functions. That looks like JavaScript." And then you go, "Wait, why is there HTML in this?" And that's what makes it JSX, is that you can write the HTML right in, mixed in with your JavaScript. I really hesitate to call SAS a framework, but we'll leave it. We'll let it slide. All right, Pascal.
I think that's a language.
It is a language, and it is desktop class. I would love to see someone write a Pascal web app without thinking about suicide.
Oh my God.
I mean, is that still used?
So there are some legacy applications out there that, yes, still use Pascal, and the reason they're legacy is because it's running something super important like processing credit card transactions. And how do you turn that off for a second and then turn on a new version of it?
Military's
Um,
or something.
yeah, so it is used. It is definitely super legacy. Build.
For sure.
Concept?
Build, what were you thinking? Like the build command in the terminal?
Yeah, like at work, I have to like if make something new, I have to like, or if I get something, I have to build it first, like CMake
Yep.
and things like that.
So build is, yep, it's definitely a concept. You would use it in the terminal. And I'm also going to put in parentheses here compile, because building and compiling is very similar. It's essentially converting your code into more machine or binary level code so the computer can execute it. Well, at least the stream's working. All right, HTML.
It is a markup language.
It is. And it is used front end. Great. Deploy.
Concept.
It is a concept. You would deploy using a tool. So it's not, deploy itself is not a tool, it is definitely a concept, but the way you use that concept is with a tool. And what's deploying?
Putting it to work.
Yeah, deploying is basically getting it out on the web, getting it off your computer and up accessible to people. So you would deploy a website, right? You have your index.html, you're playing around with it, you like it the way it is, you deploy it. And there are many different methods of deploying. But you would deploy some backend code. You have it working, it's all great on your computer. Now you want other people to use it, so you would deploy it out to the internet.
Isn't that the same as go live?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. There are times that you would deploy but not go live. So you would be going live to a specific community, right? So you would deploy to a staging server or a testing server or a QA server, but it's not quite live, but it is live to your internal company or testers or whatever. But it's a close concept. Debugging.
Finding mistakes.
I think that's a tool and a concept.
It's a concept. You can debug using a tool, like the console or inspect element or anything like that.
What did you say before?
Process.
It is a process, yeah.
Okay.
Java.
Language.
And where is it used?
Both.
It is used in mobile for Android. It is used on desktop grade applications, and it is also used backend. Trying to think if there's anything else.
So when you say it's being used for the desktop, you mean like you said, to build things like
So
Word, so that's like a front end for.
exactly, WebStorm, the IDE that I use, is built entirely using Java. So desktop means not just the interface for the program is built using Java, but also all the code of when I click on this button, what happens, that would all be written in Java as well. C#.
Language. Backend.
And we'll call out here, in case anyone sees C #, that is also C#. That's how it's written. It is used in the backend. It is also used in mobile apps if you use Xamarin, which is another framework. That's not on the list.
37.
It is on the list, thank you. Okay.
Are C# and C++ related?
Yeah, they're both C languages.
Okay.
No, I mean that seriously. They're developed from a main C language, right?
So C came out and people went, wow, doing memory management is really dumb. We shouldn't have to do this as programmers. The computer should be smart enough to do that for us. So then C++ came out, and C++ was, great and everything, but some other guy was like, nah, I want it to do more. I want it to be a little bit more object oriented, and I wanted to have a couple extra features in it. So I'm going to make my own, and I'm going to call it C#. And C# is the language that Microsoft has adopted, and .NET is primarily written in. And .NET is a web backend framework. Do we have .NET?
Add that to the list. And while you're down at the bottom, can you add ActionScript? Because I'm really mad that nobody uses Flash anymore. Back 8 years later and y'all got rid of it.
Thanks, Steve Jobs, for that one. It is a no.
Just all of my plans. I'm like, I got all these Flash tutorials.
Backend framework written in C#. Okay. Code verification. And what's it mean? What is the concept of code verification?
Security.
Make sure,
Standard.
make sure you don't have any mistakes in your code, right?
I have not actually heard of code verification. And
Are you talking about validation?
You mean validation, like the
Maybe I did.
WC3?
validation? Okay, sure. So the notion of
Standards, meeting standards.
Yeah.
standards, great.
Standards. So maybe validation is better.
Okay. Accessible code.
That is a concept.
And what's it mean?
It means that your code is user-friendly for people who have difficulty with reading, writing,
Great.
using computers in standard ways. So people who can read, write, use the mouse and all that other stuff.
Cool. All right, Ruby. And where is it primarily used? Backend.
Isn't it becoming obsolete? I read that.
It has started to decline, but the thing to keep in mind is that when companies invest in a language or a framework, it's not just, oh, we have spent the past 5 years building out our product and our product now works in this language, but we've now hired 50 developers who all write in Ruby and Ruby on Rails, right? So, all right, if we want to move to this new great language that all these other companies are moving to, what do we do with our 50 Ruby developers? And do we start over? And we have to essentially rewrite all that code. So one of the reasons why Node is becoming so popular is because Ruby on Rails is what is considered a monolithic framework, which means you write all of your code in one giant repository. And everything that you're running is in that one giant repository. And if you would like to swap out to another language or another framework, they're just like, no, you can't run both at the same time. You have to move everything over. And that's why a lot of companies like TCG Player are still on .NET. And so one of the reasons Node is becoming popular is Node is kind of a little different. And they're like, no, if you want to write a little bit of Node, you can integrate that right into your Ruby. You can write a little snippet of Node and just make an API call to it. Just integrate in that way. And Node is so lightweight and so easy to run. The Ruby server is just like, oh, yeah, I can spare a little resources for that. But if you tried to run another monolithic framework like Django and Python, when I say Django Python, by the way, I mean Django is the framework, Python is the language that you write and use the framework in. If you tried to run Django and Ruby at the same time, the server would be like on fire, like, whoa, way too much. But Node is, you can just squeak in and no one would notice.
What's the difference between Ruby and Ruby on Rails?
Ruby on Rails. Thank you. Ruby on Rails is, yep, and it is written in
Ruby?
and it is used. Great.
So when all of these things on the back end, is there one language that's used on the back end and for different websites, or do you use multiple languages on the back end?
Traditionally, you only use one language and framework. Right, so you would say, okay, I'm picking Ruby and I'm going to use Ruby on Rails as my framework.
Okay.
Or I'm going to pick Python and Django as my framework. And there are, the framework part is mix and match, right? So you can say, oh, I'm going to pick Python and use Flask instead of picking Python and Ruby on Rails. I'm sorry, Python and Django.
You said Flask, is that on our list? I don't think it is.
Flask is, where did I say it was used?
Did you say it was a
Framework.
framework?
Framework, yep. And it's used,
Backend.
yep, and it's written in
Python.
Python.
Wait, Django?
So Python.
Django, sure. Django is another framework. It is used in the backend, and it is written in Python.
So when you use, why would you use, I mean, how do you make the decision what to use on your backend?
That is a topic for another day. And is very opinionated because we could get every instructor in this room, and every instructor would pick a different framework and a different programming language. Some of them are a little bit more lightweight, and by lightweight I mean they don't have features built into it, but because they're lightweight, they're also much faster to run. So it depends. It depends how big the project is that you're building, and it also depends what human resources you have. I'm a JavaScript developer, so if I walk into a company that's not using JavaScript, yeah, I can learn whatever thing they're using, but if it's JavaScript, I can sit down and start writing code. But if they're using another programming language, I'm gonna go, okay, well, I know it's const myvar equals 5 in JavaScript, but in Python it's
Something else.
something else. I should know that because I used to write Python.
But they all do basically the same thing?
Yes.
And that is taking the data from the end user.
Yep.
And doing whatever it is your website is doing and making sure the server is, and then back again, back to the end user.
Yes.
Okay, so, no, I'm just like trying to think through, so if you are using, so you can use Python instead of JavaScript, and
Yep.
there are those considerations, but
Yep.
are there things that Python does and JavaScript doesn't do? Or are they basically
Python is
similar but different
similar.
similar pros and cons?
JavaScript, Python is often regarded as being easier to read. So you can just pick up the code and read through it and understand it because it doesn't have as much syntax. Python has a better, what they call a standard library, so tools that are just built into Python, especially for doing data analytics. There are better math-related features in Python as opposed to JavaScript.
But in the end, they can both be manipulated or used or coded to do the same things.
Yes.
Essentially.
Yes.
Okay. I think we need like one of those matchy lines.
So,
At least I do.
my question for, well, first, I'll explain the reason behind my question. I was at a woman in coding session, and we had to use I think it's called an Arduino board, and program that to make Christmas lights flash off and on.
Yep.
And we used, I don't know if it's a language, but I'm calling it a language. It was called Machine. Is that a language? I think that's what it was called. So what we put in to communicate between the electronic board and the computer.
That would be a language. I'm trying to remember what the Arduino programming language is.
Arduino.
It could be called Machine. I might not. I think it's just called Arduino language.
Arduino language. Okay.
But it is the Arduino language would compile down into machine code that the Arduino board would use to actually send the electrical signal to the light.
So when you're programming for home automation, does that lead to like a whole separate area of languages, or are we still back to these are the basics?
It can. I have over 50 internet connected devices in my house. We have smart light bulbs and all kinds of crazy stuff. And that is, I am able to write a lot of the home automation stuff in JavaScript. But I could also build out my own API in whatever language I wanted, and integrate it that way as well.
Cool.
but there may be some home automation platforms that have made their own language instead of using a more popular language like JavaScript. Just like Arduino did, right? Arduino is like, hey, we need something that's lightweight enough that will run on our boards. Let's look at what's out there. And they did, and they went, we don't really like anything that's out there. We're going to make our own.
So when you're using API like that, I don't quite understand what you mean.
Sure. So API is, you have your front end, and you have your back end, and the API is what you use to get data to and from the front end to the back end.
Okay. So it's just like an interface between the front end and back end, but you don't use that word.
Application programming interface.
Oh, interface, that's right. That's why you don't use the word. I'm with you again.
It's like when people say ATM machine.
Yeah.
COBOL.
Ancient language. I mean, I vaguely remember that from college.
We're gonna leave that on desktop.
Does that still get used?
Yeah, they still
Again,
teach
legacy
it at one point.
Is it again just legacy things or?
Don't talk bad about the community. Don't talk bad about the community.
Sorry, I don't mean to backtrack.
Yeah.
So when you have a breakdown in your API and it's consistently happening,
Mm-hmm.
where would you go to fix that?
You build your API in your backend.
Just because there's a program that we use for work,
Mm-hmm.
and they keep crashing.
Mm-hmm.
Every morning I try to go get my list for the day, and I can't get on because the API is breaking it somewhere.
Now so there are a couple places it could break, right? The API could break that the backend server isn't running, or the backend server is saying you're not authenticated, so you don't get access to this. It could be breaking that the database server, that your backend server that's running the API, the database server could be down. So front end goes to the API, goes to the server goes, you're all authenticated, let me go get that data that you requested, goes to the database server, and the database goes,
Haven't ever thought yet.
Right.
And I've gotten to the point now where I know when it's broken.
Yep.
Because when I go to open up the program, up pops a little terminal box and all the code starts coming through, and then all of a sudden it'll stop. And it takes forever, and then finally the box will pop up for me to log in.
And it could theoretically also be broken on the front end. Either the front end is asking for the wrong information, it's not sending the authentication information it needs, or it's getting the data back from the server and it's going, what's this? I don't know, this is the wrong format. You're trying to access something that's not in here, and it could be crashing there. So fun part about debugging APIs, don't ask me because I do it all day, but is figuring out where the break is. Because you get a bug report and it just goes, my screen is white. I'm like, okay, great. What were you doing when it turned white? I don't know. It's just white. Did you close the application and reopen it? Oh, I guess I could do that, right? But now you have to figure out, okay, why did they get the white screen? And it could be at any one of those steps. And that's you're traversing the whole stack. React Native. Framework, good. And where is it used? Yep. And Android and iOS. And what's it written in? JavaScript. And I'm gonna be a little more clear here. I'm gonna say JSX because JSX is a variant of JavaScript, just like Sass is a variant of CSS. Okay. JSON.
Isn't that JavaScript?
It is JavaScript. We're going to call that a standard. It is an agreed upon standard. Just like we had another standard up here. ASCII is a standard. JSON is a standard. It's an agreed upon. It's a format. we'll say language format kind of just to cheat, but it is definitely a format of the code. Xamarin.
But what does it do?
It is a agreed upon method for so JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and you've written objects as of yesterday, and you were essentially writing JSON. It is a agreed upon method of structuring data, and it is the dominant way data is sent to and returned from APIs. So when the API returns the information, it could be coming from Python, it could be coming from Ruby, it could be coming from PHP. And so everyone on the web has kind of agreed to send the data back in this format that is JSON, because most of the time when those languages were becoming popular, all of that data was being ingested by JavaScript on the front end and then shown in the application.
Oh yeah, so if you use Python on the back end,
you send the data back using JSON, and then whatever you're running on the front end goes, oh, JSON, I know that. So it is oftentimes hard to tell what kind of backend an application is using, because all you see is they build an API, but you don't know what they built the API in. And most APIs return JSON back no matter what they were building. Xamarin.
I think Xamarin is a framework that you use to create code, and Xamarin looks at that code and spits it back out so that you can create an app for an iOS device or an Android.
Yep, it is the it is the C# equivalent of React Native. So
it gives you a 2-for-1.
So exactly. So React Native lets you write all of your code out in JavaScript, and you hit the compile or build. Trying to remember what word they use, and out spits out Objective-C code to run on iOS, and out spits Java code to run on Android. And in Xamarin, it does the same exact thing, except putting your input as JavaScript and writing all of your code one time in JavaScript. You would write it all in C# instead. Spread these out a little bit. All right. Microsoft SQL Server I already put up with the group, so we're just going to clear that one. Native script.
The framework, same thing as the other ones, right?
And it is written in, don't tell me TypeScript. Or JavaScript. All right, so we're going to say JavaScript for this one. But what we're going to do is we're going to put Angular in parentheses, and we're going to go up to here, and no, that is React Native. Yeah, for React Native, we're going to say React. Alexa skills. Gonna say it's more of a concept, because the Alexa skills are built using APIs. So you essentially build your own API, and then Alexa goes and talks to your API. Linux and Unix. New category here. Even broader than tools.
Isn't Linux an operating system?
That's exactly what it is. And we could add Mac or Windows to this list as well.
Why do people prefer Linux to Mac sometimes, like real, maybe Mr. Robot people? I think they were talking about it on there.
Because
but I've heard other people say that it's more secure.
It is more secure. It is open sourced, so you can see exactly what the code is written out that makes the operating system run. You cannot do that on a Mac. It is free, and it runs on any computer, right? You can't install OS X or OS X, which is your operating system on your Mac, on a PC without extreme effort. It can be done, but not easily, and Apple does not want you to do it. So that's another reason is some people, developers who are super geeks, want to build their own computer instead of using Mac hardware. And I'm sure there are a couple other instructors that I just insulted by saying that, but clearly I'm a Mac person. Blockchain.
Concept.
Definitely a concept. It's a security concept. And so a little fun fact for you, when we were first getting together on developing out the curriculum, figuring out if we're going to cover JavaScript and front end and all of that stuff, Jesse was like, we should do a week on security. I'm like, yeah, we totally should. And he was like, great, I'll sign you up. I'm like, whoa! Only sign me up if you can find no one else. Like, I think it's a really important concept. We can definitely fill a week on it, but I only learned it because I was thrown into the deep end, and I was like, here, go set up a password system.
So what is blockchain? I don't really understand what it is.
The best way to learn about blockchain is either watching a YouTube video on it or reading some kind of like Medium article or another blog post.
Is that like the blockchain, cryptocurrency, all
Yes.
that stuff goes together?
That all goes together, and it's all about encryption and security and proving that that thing that you said is money is actually money. It's a concept. We'll leave it on there because.
Security. Well, security.
Oh, I apologize.
No, you're fine.
All right, iOS, Objective-C or Swift? Focus more on the Objective-C or Swift. Okay, so let's. You know what? That's a good point. Let's split these. iOS is an operating system, and it's mobile. iPhone and iPad. And not Apple Watch. Okay.
Language for objective.
Dave was a previous genius at the Apple Store, so. Oh, excuse me. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Once a genius, always a genius.
So when you talk about our laptops, you're talking about like the operating systems, 10 point whatever, Leopard, Tiger.
Yep, and we can add OS X, and it is an operating system that runs on the Mac.
I don't know about Tiger though.
No, Tiger was one.
Was it really?
Mm-hmm.
When?
10.5, 10.4.
I don't remember that one.
You're going back mid 2000s on that, yeah. Okay, and now let's make this Objective-C or Swift because they're used in the same place.
Huh?
What are you on?
Language?
Language, yep. And where's it used?
Mobile.
Yep, and
Desktop.
I will let that one slide. You were right. You can make Mac apps using Swift or Objective-C. Java.
Language.
I think we already covered Java, right?
Did we do Java?
Yeah.
Yep, we did Java. So Java is also used on Android. It is Objective-C is to iOS as Java is to Android. So we will get rid of that one.
So is Android like an operating system like iOS is?
Yep. All right, rapid fire. Visual Studio.
Tool.
Text editor.
Yeah.
Yep, we'll just leave it as tool.
Code. Yeah.
VS Code.
Tool.
Basic.
Language.
Where?
Not here.
Desktop.
Isn't it?
Go.
Skip.
Pass. Can I phone a friend?
Buffett. Pull it.
Lifeline.
It is a language that Google developed that's used in the back end that Google is maybe regretting a little bit because now everyone's using Node and they also support Node. But Go was meant to be like a new language that is easier to write than JavaScript itself.
Okay.
Drupal. Drupal is a framework, just like WordPress. They're also called CMSs, content management systems. And they are both written in PHP. Dart. Used. Okay. Moodle.
Somebody said Moodle? Content, classroom learning management system.
It is a CMS. I guess we'll call that a framework. Yep. Bash. We're gonna call it a tool. Just like terminal would be considered a tool, something that runs on your computer. I guess we can say desktop for that, if you really wanted.
So then, when you're using your VS Code and you see down in the bottom it's either Dart or Bash, why?
So I'm not actually familiar with Dart as much. Bash is the variant of your terminal, and it is integrated into your operating system. But you can actually use your terminal and use something other than Bash. So Mac OS and Linux use Bash by default. Windows does not. Windows uses DOS. And whenever you see an instructor like get someone set up, they'll go around and they'll help everyone with a Mac, and then there will be that one guy there with a PC, and you'll just look at him like, good luck, man. Because all the terminal commands that we know, like CDing into a directory or just doing what we think is basic things, just doesn't run on Windows. And even Microsoft has come out in the past couple years and they're like, all right, we get it. DOS is old, no one likes writing in DOS. We will support Bash on Windows as well, and that was a big deal for the development community. But Bash is the variant that you use in your terminal. Database?
Tool.
Information, I mean, it's.
I'm going to put it more as a concept because SQL is the language and...
It's like front end and back end, right?
Exactly, yep.
But can't you also like use an access database and use languages to manipulate on that?
Sure. So you would say access would go in the list with MySQL and Postgres and Oracle SQL Server and all of those.
Okay.
That's like a database management system, right? That's its own thing.
Yes, that's the kind of the database you use, so to speak.
Okay.
Mongo.
Database.
Kind of database, yes. And this, did we put NoSQL on the list? No, we didn't. You use NoSQL to query that database.
We forgot UMLs.
Sorry, who still uses UMLs?
What is that?
Unified modeling language.
It's the way you structure your database. So I would say that's a standard.
And then, so is DOS a tool as well, or is it?
It's an operating system.
DOS is it's what the operating system is built in.
Karen wants to lose 5 whole cool points.
We're gonna say operating system / tool. I'm not giving that 2 cells, but yes, it is what the operating system is essentially built in.
That's the other one I was thinking of
Not
after
giving it
basic.
Web scraping?
I gather it has something to do with going in, do you like
I was
email?
gonna say, is that like pulling information from
Open source?
Yeah, so it's a concept, and basically what you're saying is when you scrape a web page, the web page has HTML and all kinds of styling on it and navigation and all of that. And so when you scrape a web page, you're pulling the raw data off of it. So if I open up Google Maps, right, and I do a search for restaurants, I might scrape the Google Maps page and pull back the list of the 10 restaurant names that come back. And then store it in an array, manipulate the array, do whatever I want with it on my side. But the idea is the data is out there on the web page, and I'm going to scrape it off the page and then use it. Bootstrap, where is it used?
For displaying what? For displaying what?
Front end.
Oh, front end and CSS.
And it's CSS. And we'll throw HTML on it because you could argue that it's HTML as well. D3. It is a framework used in the front end for data visualization. Runtime environment, we already said is a concept. Angular.
Would D3 be like TensorFlow? Is that something that's similar?
TensorFlow tends to run in the back end, but it is similar. TensorFlow is used more for analyzing the data and turning the data into information, right? So instead of it just being a huge swath of data points, you would then analyze it, figure out what all those data points mean using TensorFlow, and then you could build out a visualization using D3. Angular. We got 4 more to go. You're not getting a break until you get through it.
Framework.
It is a framework. Where do we use Angular?
Backend.
Front end, and it's written in
JavaScript.
Lisp. It is.
Yeah, that's what I was asking about for artificial intelligence.
I believe it's primarily used in the back end, although you could, I believe, also use it on desktop. Prolog.
Language.
And I don't think anyone uses Prolog on desktop class. ActionScript.
Don't do that. Now, all the rejects I nominated.
It is a language.
The Latin of computer programming.
Yeah, it's used on the front end.
Okay.
I gotta throw all my
We'll say Flash.
Okay, so what do you use the Angular framework for?
Angular is a direct competitor to React.
Okay.
React was created by Facebook, and as with most frameworks, it was born out of Facebook needed a way to interact with the web page, and jQuery just wasn't cutting it. So some super smart guy created React 5 years ago, maybe. And Facebook was like, hey, that's really cool. You should open that up to the community. And so they did, and now a lot of websites are built with React. You tend to use jQuery if you're building a static website, a website with not a ton of information in it. That's just your HTML, your CSS. It goes out there. You might have basic interactivity with it, but you would build that all in jQuery. Yes.
Is Actions or was ActionScript, since it's dead, was it similar to JavaScript? What was it similar to?
It was, yeah, it was JavaScript. It was more for animating things on the front end.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, you could say it was close to JavaScript.
Close to JavaScript. Okay.
So jQuery is used for static websites. Now, when you get into web applications, something like Facebook or going onto your bank's page or Google Sheets is built in Angular. So this entire interactive program is built using Angular, and it's because JavaScript as a language is fine, but people wanted more tools and wanted to build things more easily on the web. And so Google came out with Angular around the same time as React came out, and they're both equally popular. Angular pulled ahead because I think it was out a little bit earlier, and in the most recent survey results, React just pulled ahead. but that's another one where you could throw all the instructors in a room and half of them would pick Angular and the other half would pick React. Okay, any other questions?
Isn't Vue a framework similar to like Angular and React?
Vue is the third one that goes just with React and framework, front end, JavaScript. Should probably spell that out.
Do you think that we've missed anything important that should be added?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
So the point of the exercise is you guys clearly have heard of 71 different things out there, and it's really easy to go 71, how am I supposed to keep all of them straight, right? But when you start breaking it down and going, okay, that's a language, where's that language used? And some of them, like JavaScript, are particularly fun because it can be used in the front end or the back end. And you can argue Python, yes, it can be used in desktop grade applications, and some people write little scripts on their computer and run it, but for the most part, Python's used back end or on the server. So when you think of these things, now when you Google them and you go to the page and they say, oh, we're a back-end framework, you know, back-end framework, all right, that has to be written in a certain language. What language is that written in? Oh, I know that language, I could use this framework if I wanted to. So I know I just spent almost an hour and a half going over this, so I'm going to fly through loops. But I hope that this is helpful. This is in the Google Drive. You're welcome to go reference it. I am sure that you will say this to someone else and they'll go, well, it's not really a framework. And they're like, okay, you're right. It's not really a framework, but it's close enough. All right, so yeah.
Okay, so a theme that I'm seeing is that you have a front end with some buttons or stuff that the user can use, and then there's an API connected to it.
Yep.
That connects those buttons to the back end.
Yep.
Or the API is the back end.
The API is built in the back end.
Okay, and then the back end helps you connect to the database where you actually have data being stored.
You got it.
And then back again.
And then yeah, all that data can come back.
So is that the same for like mobile apps and websites?
So mobile apps, think of it as swapping out your front end and putting mobile in its place. So mobile apps still need a back end and still need to communicate with a database. Not all mobile apps. I will put a little asterisk on that. Just like not all web apps need an API. If I want to build a game on either mobile or on the web, and I don't need to save high scores, and I want to build tic-tac-toe. I can build tic-tac-toe without an API. And I can build that on mobile or on web. Don't need to save that data, don't need to put it up in the server, don't need to do authentication. I'm just building tic-tac-toe. And so you can do just front end or just mobile, but the vast majority of true applications have an API that's built in the back end that runs on a server that connects to a database. That's either SQL or NoSQL, and if it's NoSQL, it's probably Mongo, and if it's SQL, it's MySQL or Postgres or MySQL.
Wait, you lost me again. What is
SQL is a language for querying the database, for getting data in and out of the database.
So you use that together with JavaScript?
You write SQL quote in your backend.
Okay.
SQL kind of runs in whatever backend language you were using, whether it be JavaScript with Node or Python or any of those.
Okay. Because it really is like learning a whole new language when you're talking
Yes.
to people.
Oh, it's learning 5. I call myself a polyglot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, I know multiple programming languages. What's harder to learn, Spanish or JavaScript?
Yeah, you don't need to be logical. Well, you do speak German, I will say that.
Right, and
It's crazy.
when people start learning, they go, oh no, that doesn't count. And by the time they get to the end of it, they go, you win, it's easier to learn Spanish than it is to learn JavaScript.
Well, I was saying, Gus and I were talking, and I said this reminds me most of learning German in college, because there was that frustration, I can't remember, or whatever, the article, or case, or whatever nonsense, and then it was easier in some aspects than others, but it doesn't really remind me of math, it reminds me of language.
Yes.
But conversationally, you don't have to say, like, if you say.
Okay, we're gonna pause for 1 second.
Oh, go ahead.
We're gonna go on break, and then you can continue this on break.
Okay, go ahead and pause, and then I'll respond.
All right, guys, it's 7:06. Let's be back at like 7:20. Do a 15-minute break.
Sure, but I was gonna
All right, I should be back on the stream now. So, I'm going to leave phonetic lookup up because I know a couple students had issues with that. I'm gonna hopefully get through the loops really quickly, and then if we have time at the end, I will come back to the phonetic lookup. So I am starting with basic JavaScript. Iterate with JavaScript while loops. I believe that is in the JavaScript and algorithms under basic JavaScript. Let's see if I was right. Using objects. Maybe I was wrong. Let's try.
There's iterate with JavaScript, while loops, for loops with odd numbers and for loops.
Oh, maybe I opened the wrong. Iterate with JavaScript while loops.
Okay.
Under basic JavaScript. Sorry,
It's just one
my bad.
after what we did.
So there are a bunch of different kinds of loops. Loops right next to variables are probably the code that I write the most. And then functions would come after that. Super important to understand. Super frustrating to debug, but still super important to use. So a while loop is exactly as it sounds. While this is true, go do this. And as soon as that condition in the while loop is not true, we will stop running the loop. So in their example, they say our array is empty. Var, don't use var, use let. I is equal to 0. While I is less than 5, go ahead and push or add into our array whatever the value of I is. So this would start out, the first time this runs, our array would have the value 0 in it because I is equal to 0. And then we I++, we increment I. Okay, so now we go back up here and we say, okay, I is now 1. Is 1 less than 5? It is, so we go back inside of this and we say, okay, our array, add 1. So this loop is going to run. Can anyone tell me how many times it's going to run?
5, 4, 5.
Because it counts three.
Oh, but it's less than 5, so 5.
So 5. And what is our array going to have in it?
0, 1, 2, 3, 4.
You got it. Okay, so push the number 0 through 4 to my array using while loop. Well, we got this. We just talked about how to do that. So we're going to say while I is less than 5. We are going to my array dot push I, and we're also going to add to I. No, is this going to work?
We didn't say anything about I. We didn't have a let.
There you go. The computer's going to go I. What's I? Where does I start? So we're going to say let I equals 0. And we're going to go ahead and run it. And we got it. By the way, you guys don't have to follow along with me, coding it out. I'm posting these solutions in a Google Doc that's in the Google Classroom. If you want to, I'm not discouraging you from doing it, just saying that, you don't have to do it.
Is there a big difference between saying var I equals 0 versus let I equals 0?
Let is a newer version of JavaScript, ES6. So I believe Joey is covering the differences between ES5 and ES6 in 2 weeks. And I bet he'll go over that.
Oh, okay. So we can just say var or let at this.
I would encourage you to use let and const instead of var. Var is the older version. Okay? So, now we're going to do for loops. While loops, while they definitely exist, are not as commonly used. For loops are definitely used more. the general rule of thumb is you want to use a while loop when you don't know exactly how many times the loop is going to run, as opposed to a for loop where you know exactly how many times you want it to run. For that very reason, we use for loops more often because typically the data sets are defined. We know exactly how many times it will run. For gets a little bit more complicated on the syntax, but we have three parts to a for loop other than we say for and we do a parenthesis. And think about these as kind of three different parameters that we're saying. We're saying where do we want the incrementer to start? So we say var I equals 0, and I'm going to change that to a let. So we say let I equals 0. We're going to start I at 0. And what's the condition? How often are we going to run this loop? We're going to say, well, I is less than 5. And then we're going to say, all right, what do we want to do with I? So once we finish running this loop, we're going to add 1 to I. So we should be using a for loop, and my array should equal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we run this, if we okay, their example is at the top. So they're saying we're going to say for let I equal, and we want it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what are we going to start I at?
1.
1. And what do we want to run until?
Less than 6.
Or less than or equal to 5. And that I find is sometimes easier for me to keep in my head. Both are going to return the same result. You can do whichever you prefer. And then what's the last thing we're going to put in the parentheses?
I plus plus.
Yep. And then what are we going to do in the for loop?
My array dot push.
My array dot push.
And we're going to push I. And we're going to run the tests. Did it. Good. Okay. Now what's it want us to do? It wants my array to equal 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Ideas?
Start at 1 and add 2.
Okay. Var nope, bad max. Var let I equal 1, while I is less than
Is this in basic?
Was it
basic JavaScript. Yes.
1 through 5 less than or equal to 9.
8 or 9 since I'm adding. Would it
So
matter?
It wants odd numbers, so you can either do less than or equal to 9
or you could do less than 10, or you could even do less than 11, right? So let's just do 10, and we want to I plus equal to.
Do you have to space after the equal sign?
You do not.
Okay.
And in here we are going to my array dot push, and what are we going to do? Push in I. Got it. Next, just do it all again, but do it backwards. Okay, for let I equal, we want 9 all the way down to 1 in our output.
So I is going to start with 9.
Yep.
And then you're going to do, well, I is greater than
Can you blow that up just a little?
Oh,
0.
yeah.
Thank you.
Greater than
0. Sure, let's try it, right? What's the worst that's going to happen? Our loop's going to run infinitely and our computer will start smoking. Just kidding, there are protections against that. You can write infinite loops, right? If we put the wrong condition in here, this loop is going to run forever. And eventually, Chrome will be smart enough and go, hey, this loop has run 4 million times. We're going to stop it because something probably isn't right. Okay, so while I is greater than 0, and what do we want to do to I?
Minus equal to.
Minus equal to. And we are going to my array dot push I. Not forget our semicolon, and we're gonna run it. Got it.
Total should be 20.
Okay, what does it want now? Total should be declared and initialized to 0.
Wait 1 second.
Sure.
It says, on the last one, it says cannot read property 0 of undefined.
Did you
I just said poor.
Dave, can you?
Sorry.
So we're gonna keep going on this one. We are going to total should be declared and initialized to 0. So let's say let total equal 0. Total should equal 20. Okay, well, we'll do that in the loop. You should use a for loop to iterate through my array. So we can use variables in our middle condition, right? How long do we want this loop to run? So we're going to say for let I equal 0, while I is less than the length of my array. So the length of my array is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to say my array dot length. And then we're going to I++. So just to make sure we know what's happening here, I'm just going to console log out my I. And what do we see? We see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the length is actually 5, right? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements in this. But because we started I at 0, we want to do that because arrays are 0 indexed. So we started I at 0. We have that information, and now we want to add it to total. So we're going to say total plus equals. Now, if we do I, is that going to work? I mean, one way to find out, right? Did not. We don't have the checks. So what we want is the value of that index from the array. We don't want I itself. So I is starting out as 0. The point of this activity is that we're adding all these numbers together, right? So 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 equals 20. So we don't want to add 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We want to add the actual values of the array. So how do we access a value in an array? Or the bracket notation.
Square bracket.
So what we're going to do is we want to use bracket notation because I is a variable, right? We don't want we want the value of I, the index of I. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say my ARR bracket I. And what that's going to do is the first time this runs, I is 0. So it's going to say, okay, my array I. Well, I is 0, so we want the 0 index of my array. Okay, that's 2. Okay, so now this whole part evaluates out to 2, and we say, okay, total plus equals, total is 0, 0 plus 2 is now 2. So total, at the end of this for loop, the first time it runs is 2. And you know what? We can check that. We can console log out our total. And the first time it runs, it's 2. Okay, now we do it the first time. We come back up here. I is now 1. We added 1 to I. Now I is 1. And we say, okay, is 1 less than the length of the array? Well, the length of the array is still 5. 1 is less than 5. So let's go ahead and run this loop again. Okay, total was 2 from the previous run. So 2 plus equals, add 2 plus my array. Let's go back up here. I is 1. Get the 1 index, which is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. And we notice that when we log out the total, we get 5.
I totaled it the first time and it just said test should be declared, total should be declared and initialized to 0.
So did you tell it total starts at 0?
Yeah. And then for let.
You're forgetting the dot, the our dot line, right? Oh, no.
No, you're right. Well, you know what? Let's run mine because I didn't tell you mine was right either.
No. True. Oh, you got it too.
Bad free code camp. It should be var. Let is what it should be in modern code. It's just not updated enough. So free code camp wanted it to be var.
Okay.
All right, we got that one done. So we can nest for loops. Yay, we can run a loop in a loop. So what we're going to do is it wants all of these numbers multiplied together. So it doesn't matter if it's in the inner array or outer array, it just wants them all multiplied together. So let's space this out a little bit just so we can see the data structure a little bit better. So I'm just going to add some line breaks here. And now all of a sudden, it's much easier for us to see that there is an array that is holding these arrays in it. Okay. So what it wants us to do is we are going to loop through this outer array, right? We're going to get this, then we're going to get this, then we're going to get this. So this is when variable names are very important. We want to make sure we're keeping track of the inner versus the outer. So we're going to say for let outer index equal 0, while the outer index is less than the array length outer index plus plus. So it doesn't have to just be I. And I is fine if you only have one thing going on in the loop. But as soon as you start mixing inner and outer, you're going to be like, wait, was that I or was that J? I don't remember. There's no reason why you can't just call it outer index instead of I. Okay? So now that we're in here, let's just console log our ARR sub or square bracket outer index. My first program teacher, whenever she used square brackets, she would say sub, and I've picked that up, and that's a horrible habit. So if we look at the array, or what's getting console logged out, we have 1, 2. We're getting this bit. Then we have 3, 4. We're getting this bit. So what we need is the actual numbers, right? We can't multiply arrays together. We need to get each individual number to multiply it. So what we're going to do is now that we have this value as ARR outer index, we're going to declare a new variable, and we're going to say const inner array is equal to the array outer index.
Is it going to let you use const?
Yes, because it's not checking for that specifically in the outcomes. Okay, so now we are going to do a for loop, and we're going to say for let inner index, not inner array, inner index is equal to 0, while inner index is less than the inner array length, inner index plus plus. So now we have the value of inner array, let's just console log this, console log our inner array with our inner index. And notice what we get out is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which means because the first time this loop runs, the outer index is 0, and we say, okay, this array, this big one out here, what's the length of that big array? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so outer index is going to be 0, and we say, okay, that whole big array, outer index 0, get the first element in that array, the index of 0. And inner array is now equal to this array of 1, 2. So now what we do is we say, okay, great, now we have inner array, that's set. Now every time I say inner array, I could say ARR outer index. But what I find is it's easier to just throw that in a new variable, because then you get to name the variable, and now you get to think, okay, now I'm working on this inner array in here instead of, wait, outer array, inner array, double indexing, it gets really confusing, right? So now we have it called inner array. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, now we're in this block. So inner index is 0, started at 0, and while 0 is less than the inner array length, okay, what's the length of the inner array? 2. So we're going to console log that out. So inner array with the inner index is going to return 1, and then it's going to return, then it gets to the end of this, goes back up to the top of this for loop. We're still in this big for loop. We haven't forgotten about that one. But now it comes back up here. Inner index is 1. It's going to say, okay, go console log out the inner array, which is this one down here, at the index of 1. So it console logs out the value 2. Okay? Now it gets to the end of the for loop. It comes back up and it goes inner index is now equal to 3. Is 3 less than the length of the inner array, which is 2? Goes, no, 3 is not less than 2. So it goes, great, I'm done my for loop. And then it gets to this for loop and it goes, wait, I'm just done that inner for loop. I now need to go back up and check the outer for loop. Now the outer for loop, outer index is equal to 1. Is 1 less than the length of this array? Well, this array has 3 arrays in it. So 1 is not less than 3. So now let's go ahead and repeat that whole process with these values. So inner index now gets set back to 0 because we left the end of this loop, came back up to the top, incremented our outer index, and ran it over again. So what we should do in here, if all goes well, is just say product times equals inner array, inner index. And if all goes well, I got lucky on that one. All right, I'm actually going to download this, and then this is a good place to stop and make sure you guys are getting this. It's really helpful to trace your code. So even though you get it working, make sure you understand how the computer is executing it. Because when it goes wrong, you want to be able to go through step by step and go, all right, what's the computer doing at this point? So if you want to go through here and put in some console logs if you get it working, that's really good to make sure you understand what order the computer is executing this in. Take a 2-minute break. If anyone does not have it running, feel free to raise your hand.
I think
Which one?
It might be a memory issue with the computer. We're having some quick responses, so.
Oh,
Okay.
oh, I made just something here, but there's no semicolon. Oh, wait, I need the plus.
Oh, do an opening squiggly curly brace. And then delete that extra one. There you go.
So that's this one.
And now you got an extra one. Delete
This
12, 11 or 12. Oh, hold on.
What did I do?
Put that one back. And now delete the extra one that I put in because you put in that there. And there you go.
That should work.
So now you're just console logging out the value, but you want to actually times equal it to the product.
Okay, so what do I still?
If you scroll down over on the left, you aren't actually passing them. So what you're doing is you're just console logging it out, but you're still not multiplying yet.
Okay. Oh, wait, what am I missing? So is that for blah, 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 product?
Look at the console log.
That's what I'm missing. Okay.
You need help?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we are semicolon adding.
Oh.
Okay, so that's still not it. Let's check array, outer index, inner, outer, inner, product. Product is the sum or the multiplication. We're timesing all the numbers together. We're not adding all the numbers together.
Okay, so
Nope, no, you had it right. Product. Instead of plus equals, you want it times equals.
why do we have to do the equals after?
Otherwise, it's just going to times product by whatever the value is in the array, and then not store it anywhere.
Oh.
Yeah. We're so close. How else are we doing? Good. I think, let's see how many more we have to do here. That's one more to do, and then we're gonna set you loose on the homework assignment. All right, so we are going to iterate with a do while loop. So the only difference between a while loop and a do while loop is a do while loop is guaranteed to run the first time no matter what the condition is of the while loop. So what I mean by that is I can write some while loop that says let j equal 5, and while j is less than 1, let's say, console.log this ran. And you notice nothing ran, nothing came out, right? Your test output will be here. Well, where's my test output? Well, j5 is not less than 1, so it didn't run at all. And we would expect it to do that. But sometimes you want your code to run at least one time and do something, and then continue running if something is true. So what we can do here is we can say do something while something else is true, and we get this ran once, but then it came down here and it said, okay, we did this, now j5 is not less than 1, so we're not going to continue doing it. But if we change this to j is less than 10, we get this ran. Oh, Jesus, what's happening? We never changed j. So we're going to go up here and we're going to say j++ in the loop, and now we only get this ran a couple times. So that's just an example. Let's see what they actually want us to do. Do while for all of this, my array should equal 10, I should equal 11. Let's just delete this. What do they say? My array, I is equal to 10. Change the while loop to a do while loop. Okay, so we're going to remove this and we're going to say do this code while I is less than 5. Well, that was too easy. So there are a lot more loops to cover, a lot of different kinds of loops, but I think we hit our saturation point for the evening. So we're gonna stop here. We're gonna make sure we get all the free code camp working. And then there's a Khan Academy link in Google Classroom if you guys want to work on that. They will summarize everything, so it's not just exercises. There are a couple questions in there and then explanations behind all of these loops as well, which I would encourage you to read. Tomorrow we have a presenter coming in, Sean Burdick, to talk about interviewing and what the technical hiring process looks like. He has already sent over the slides, and I think it's super valuable. When I was teaching in the other boot camp, it was something a lot of the students asked for and really enjoyed getting that information. Hiring process for technical coding is a little different than a standard job. So we will start out class with him presenting that. And then on the curriculum, we are supposed to be talking about higher order functions. I'm going to try and boil that down as short as possible, so we can talk about some other kinds of loops, and maybe do a little loop project, or maybe dive into record collection. But that's all TBD based off of how much time we have tomorrow. So for tonight, it's just a matter of doing the Academy classes, and then it's going to be similar to Free Code Camp. I think just screenshot your progress and submit it, or just submit, hey, I made it to the end, whatever. I trust you guys.
What do you think at the end?
Well, then tell me how far you made it and where you got stuck. Cool. All right, I'm going to end the stream for the evening, and we should